And we're going to turn it over to Mr. Barr, who's going to open us up. This man. Whoa!
He knows I love the mic. And I love the stage. When you're up here, you actually hands-on and training. Be cognizant of your surroundings. We leave anyone going off the edge to create more of an issue than we need. Stay close to the tables. So, whether keep the pressure kids or stop the bleed kids, first I introduce, remember is by Dr. Lawrence and his two daughters, Cambria and Macy. And they were able to get them into every classroom in the Hart School District, junior high or high school. So they are joining us. They're just running a little bit late. We're going to go ahead and start with our presenters from Henry Mayo with some of the hands-on and practical stuff. Again, you're uneasy, make sure you just excuse yourself. There's obviously no judgment. We just want to better equip you. And you never know. It's not just about Saugus High School and school shooting. You could be at a barbecue this summer, you could be at the beach, you could be wherever, where some of this training might come into play and you could be of use. So thank you for being here. Appreciate it. And I'm going to turn it over to him now.
Thank you, Mr. Barr. I'm not used to having to use a microphone to do this. My name is Angela. I'm one of the trauma nurses at Henry Mayo, and this is my colleague Heidi. She also works with our pre-hospital care, so she helps take care of everything that goes on here. So usually this is really Dr. Lawrence and Macy and Cambria's event, because they were actually the driving force behind starting to keep the pressure and getting these kids in your schools. I would also like to echo what Mr. Barr said. If anybody, I understand this may be very sensitive subject today. If anybody does not feel like staying here, I will not be slighted at all if anybody has to leave. So we'll start. I'll probably need Heidi because I don't have three hands. Can't hold a microphone and demonstrate this. So basically in your kids, and everybody has these in your classrooms, you have 2 tourniquets, you have quick clot gauze, you have a compression bandage, and you have shears, you have gloves, and you have a mylar blanket. So if you ever need to use this, if anybody is having life-threatening bleeding, using that, those silver blankets, using those will really help patients to clot, because if you keep them warm, they will clot better. Okay, so we will start with just a really quick demonstration of this, and then everybody will actually get to, as many as wants to come and do hands-on, feel the equipment, and try it all out. Okay, so we'll start off with pressure dressing. If somebody is bleeding uncontrollably, and this is really for severe bleeding, it's not for minor little bleeds. Most bleeding will stop with direct pressure. So if you come across someone who's bleeding, you can apply pressure yourself with your hands, with a t-shirt, any type of material. If the bleeding continues and it doesn't stop with that, then you have to move on to something else. But if you have a kit like this, you go ahead, you open it. So if you're packing, this gauze has been used a lot in training, so it looks a little ratty. Okay, so what you need to do is you start packing into the wound. You have to actually get your finger in as far as you can. That gives you the best chance of stopping that bleeding. So you start, and I know it's a little hard to see here, but I think we're not projecting, no. Okay, so what you do is you start winding the gauze around your finger. This gauze, it's called quick clot gauze or combat gauze. There's different names for it. It's a special type of gauze that has a mineral called kaolin in it. When kaolin comes in contact with the bleeding vessel, it starts the clotting process. But in addition to that, again, this is called keep the pressure. So pressure is the main theme among everything we're training you on. So you just keep pushing in. You don't push gauze in, take your finger out, get some more, put some back in. Whatever technique you use, everybody has different levels of dexterity. Wrap it around your finger, push it in, use your other finger, get some more. Either switch out fingers, but just constantly keeping that pressure. Once you have packed the wound until no more can go in, you can take your excess and then just pack it on top of the wound. If you have this great fancy gauze, you can hold pressure for 3 minutes after you've packed. We're in the twilight zone. Hold pressure for 3 minutes. If you don't have this quick clot gauze, hold pressure for 10 minutes. If you're using regular gauze or a t-shirt or some other type of absorbent material. We know this will work so much better, so you hold pressure for 3 minutes. Then you take your compression dressing, and this one, the ones in your case have like a pad, which you would put over that wound you've packed, and then yours actually does not have Velcro, yours has a clip at the end. But just for demonstration, we're going to wrap this tightly around the wound. Again, you're putting more pressure on top of what you've already done. I'll try to hold this. A real arm or leg, or any other part of the body isn't generally square, so it's easier to wrap. This can go into a wound anywhere, on your arms, legs, or in the body. Somebody who's bleeding from their body, they really need to get to a hospital. They need, there's less you can do in the field for somebody who's bleeding anywhere in the torso. Okay, so after you've wrapped this tight, if you use this special dressing, take the packaging and just slip it into the outer layer of your dressing. Don't put it all the way inside because we don't want you knocking off the dressing or knocking off any clots you started. This tells us when you get to the hospital that you've used this gauze in that wound. That way we know if there were several people and they had this packed and other people had regular gauze or just other material packed in their wound, we need to take care of the others first because we know how well this works. Okay, so that is that one. Just keep an eye on them, make sure they're warm. If you had somebody that you had to move from a situation, try to maybe have them on a carpeted floor versus like tile or concrete. That way they'll just stay warmer. Okay, so that can work anywhere on the body. If you have people who are bleeding from their arms or legs, tourniquets can only be used on extremities. We use the orange one because it's easier to see. Okay, so these are designed, you can put them on yourself or you can put them on somebody else. I'm going to put down my mic so I can demonstrate this. Well, actually first, if you open this one up, we'll show you the parts. So generally they come wound up like this. There's a tiny stamp on here. They Velcro themselves together. So I've done it a few times, you can trust Velcro to save your life. So I'll hang off the cliff. So if they come as one long band, you can just string it through the buckle, and you guys will, when you get to see it up close, it'll be a little bit
I think
easier.
you just change the output display settings.
Which one?
Oh no.
It's going to be a great video afterwards. Okay, so you string it together like that, and now actually Heidi can put it on my arm. Okay, so regardless of where you're bleeding, if you're bleeding lower down your arm or lower down your leg, always go up high. You have to go at least 2 inches above the wound, but go closer to the level of your heart, wherever the heart is pumping out the blood at the highest pressure. So pull the first time when you put it on, give it a really good yank. Let that do most of the work for you. Then you start to turn the windlass. It's this plastic, what do you call it? Baton. Yeah. It's called a windlass. So you start twisting this. You can twist it either way. It doesn't matter. Either way is going to tighten the strands that are inside this band and start to compress down on your arm. So you tighten it until you see the bleeding stops. Okay? If you feel comfortable, you can check for a pulse. If this is tight enough to stop bleeding, I should have no pulse in my radial artery. So obviously Heidi's being nice to me. She's not going to tighten it the whole way because it hurts when you tighten, even after 2 or 3 turns. You may have to do up to 5 turns. It depends on whether you're putting it on an arm or a thigh, like a large thigh versus a small arm. It would take more turns. After you have twisted it until the bleeding stops, there's this little clamp hook here. It'll just pretty much fit right into it, depending on which way you've turned it. It'll find its own way home. Then you put the timestamp over here with a pen. There's a marker in the kit. Anything else you can use, you put the time on here. And then that way it tells us when you get to the hospital how long it's been on. So if more than one person had tourniquets, we know who we need to take care of first. Okay, we will remove that one. So any of these things you do will hurt. If you're packing a wound, if you're putting on a tourniquet, so it's really important to tell the person that you're helping that that you're saving their life, either they're confused or something. So if you come up and start doing something painful to them, you want to make sure, even if you are panicked, that you don't try not to transmit that to them, and in your calmest voice, just explain to them what you're doing, and tell them up front that this might hurt, but I'm helping you. Anybody have any questions about any of this? Yes?
Can you tighten it too tightly?
No. I mean, pretty much as you tighten it and you watch the bleeding stop, it's kind of like a hose. As you're turning it off, the water comes out less and less. I mean, you can only tighten it a certain amount. I've not seen any evidence of people getting broken bones or anything from a tourniquet. And speaking of bones, sorry, don't ever put it over joints, no elbows, no knees. And if I had something in my pocket right here and you needed to put one on my leg, you have to become a pickpocket. Take out my phone, keys, anything, because you don't want to put that tourniquet on top of what might be. Yes?
Is there any reason to be concerned about the positioning of the limb? Like, once you do the tourniquet, should the person just have their arm flat on the floor? Should it be up on the chest? Is there any particular?
If you can, elevate it to whatever position, depending on pain level. If there's an impaled branch or something sticking out of you, you might have less mobility. But yes, if you can elevate it, that's good. But and maybe obviously have the person lying down so that they also have more blood circulating to their brain and other important organs.
So you pack the gauze and then you do a tourniquet if an extremity every time?
You don't need to do both. So you have the choice, and if you had more than one person bleeding and somebody was on their extremities and somebody else was in their torso, then you could actually choose, because you know that the gauze can only go into the torso. You can't use a tourniquet there. You can't use a tourniquet on what we call junctional areas. So if your injury is too high up on your thigh or your arm, there's not enough room then left to put a tourniquet. You can't put one around somebody's neck, so we can do there. So if the tourniquet works because it's on an extremity and that's what you have available, you do not need to use both. Now, unless the bleeding doesn't stop, so no matter how tight you tighten it and the bleeding does not stop, then you can try tightening it a little more, but if it won't go anymore, you can either pack it with the gauze, or if you have space to put a second tourniquet above the first one, you can also do that. But you have to have all of this available for that one person. But no, you do not need to use both unless the bleeding does not stop.
So the tourniquet would be best for like arms or legs?
Yes.
Okay.
I can't see people so well, so if anybody else has a question.
So the tourniquet doesn't go directly on the wound, but it goes above, and the idea is that it slows down blood going to the extremities.
The idea is that it totally cuts off the blood supply so that the blood is not coming out of your body. The blood needs to stay in your body. So technically it's no longer going to go to that part of your body below where you put on your tourniquet. But that's normally not a good thing. You don't normally want to have a part of your body with no blood flow going to it. But you also don't want all your blood going out of that area.
So that's why it has to be as tight as possible.
Yes. People often ask about improvised tourniquets. If, obviously, if you're at some place, you're camping, you're doing whatever, there's a lot of, these kits are starting, or kits like this are starting to be in a lot of public places, but they're not everywhere. So if you're someplace and you come across somebody who is bleeding and you don't have any of these devices, obviously you want to do something. So if you're going to use an improvised tourniquet, you want to have it at least something that's 1.5 inches wide. So a shoelace or something like that is not really sufficient. People a lot of times use belts. Belts are good, but they only have holes at the end. It doesn't tighten down close enough to the width of, let's say, my arm. So if you're going to use a belt as an improvised tourniquet, you really need to make sure you stay with that person and you're the one that's holding that pressure tight. You don't give somebody who's been bleeding and who's lying there on the ground that belt to hold, because they're probably going to lose their grip, and then they'll just start rebleeding. So if you ever use improvised tourniquet, and if you can, make sure you stay with that person and monitor them.
Good question.
Same with your wound packing. If you know, this takes a little longer than a tourniquet. So if you have different people that you are treating, maybe after you've packed the wound, you could delegate somebody else to hold the pressure. You know, nobody needs training to do that. So if you have training, you can actually delegate some of the tasks to other people.
Angela, we have another question.
I understand the use of the tourniquet. It's going to cut off the blood supply, which is going to cut off the oxygen, let's say, to the heart. How long can you keep that tourniquet on without losing the loss of that arm?
You know, we have to thank our military. They've done so much of the research that's behind. This is actually called a CAT tourniquet, so it's combat applied tourniquet, the same with the gauze. One of the trade names is combat gauze. So in a lot of the research that the military have done, we found that even up to 6 hours with a tourniquet on, there's been very limited evidence of loss of the limb. Sometimes people will get like a paresthesia of their nerves, so it's like a tingling or something, which may actually be reversed with physical therapy. But there's, most people would rather have that than not to. Dr. Lawrence and Macy and Cambria are here. We've just gone through the demonstration of the tourniquet and wound packing. Would you guys like to?
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
So, Polly, we thought this was supposed to start at 8:15, so it's kind of early. Correct. So I'm not sure. It sounds like you guys already covered the majority of the items. I think that I'm Bud Lawrence. I'm the medical director of the emergency department here at Henry Mayo, in your community hospital, if you live in this community as we do. And we're thankful to be here today to talk to you guys. Late, apparently. Sorry. You know, back over a year and a half ago or so, the girls came up with an idea to raise over $100,000 from private funding to put kids in every single classroom in every junior high school and high school in the Heart District. These kids, I think you guys probably don't know what these kids look like. And usually the girls do all the talking, but today is kind of more of a special day. And the purpose of these kids was that they would never be used, that they were there just to be a safety net for our community. You know, in all of our schools, our daughters go to Valencia, and it was a big, important piece for them to know that they had this bit of safety in the event that anything would ever happen, and not that anything would ever happen. And then something happened, and which you guys know all too well. So, you know, I think on behalf of the girls, because this is truly their project, I would just say that, you know, as a family, we're humbled and grateful that our kids were able to be in a place where they were needed. And and we're also equally grateful that the staff here knew how to use the things that were in the kits, and that's why a day like today is so important for us to get you guys up here and get hands-on training so that you guys can see how all these things work, so that you never have to use them ever again. But you can always take this knowledge with you anywhere in your life. If you're hiking and you're a motor vehicle accident, someone cuts themselves in the kitchen. That's why we're so thankful to partner with our trauma center, Henry Mayo, and have our Henry Mayo nurses, our trauma nurses here, to help us with this piece of education, where the girls then also provided the tools for the education. So I just want to let them speak. I think, or mostly they say hi, because usually what they would do is the demonstration of these things, but you guys already got that. So here you go.
So I'm Macy Lawrence, and I'm Cameron Lawrence. And he basically explained everything, but we just want to let you guys know that we're so grateful and we're so humbled to know that these kids were here to help you guys in that situation, and we're really, we're just really grateful. Yes, so,
Yeah, I think we're, so I think what we would generally what we would do is we would do a demonstration portion, which it sounds like you guys already got, which is awesome. And then the next piece that we would do is we would ask if there's any questions about any of the items. I don't know if you guys got a chance to do that or not. But if there are any questions about anything that they explained, either the tourniquet, the bleed gauze, the compression dressing, I think it's important to note that in these kits there are also trauma shears, which you can use to cut clothing if you need to get to a wound. There are gloves, if you feel the need to put gloves on, there's one pair of gloves. And there's also an emergency blanket to keep patients warm, because we know that patients that are cold tend to bleed more. So we want to make sure we keep patients warm, which would include putting a sweatshirt or a blanket or anything on those patients. So before we go, I think, into the hands-on session part, which is what's up next, which is usually what we do, does anybody have any questions about any of the things that they saw? And there are no bad questions. Yeah?
On the tourniquet, they were saying that obviously you're not getting blood flow in that extremity. If it's been a few hours, should you loosen it to get blood flow going again and then redoing it?
So that is a great question. So over the course of the years, the idea of a tourniquet has kind of waxed and waned. And in the beginning, we had a lot of people in these presentations who would say, hey, I was a Boy Scout or Girl Scout, and they taught us no tourniquets, they're bad. So much of what we know about stopping severe bleeding, we've learned from our heroes in the military and the law enforcement agencies. And it is very crystal clear that tourniquets save lives. Now, in this urban/suburban setting, you would not take the tourniquet down. The limb usually can last about 4 hours without blood supply, and we can usually deal with that up to about 4 hours. So a lot of people say, hey, listen, I take these wilderness classes, and we learn about taking the tourniquet down every few hours to reperfuse the extremity. That makes sense if you're up some mountain, you don't know if help is coming, and you may be 12, 14, 24, 48 hours away from help. Yes, in that sense, that situation makes sense. But for the urban-suburban situation where it's very astute, the paramedics, the people coming to help you are not going to enter into any situation once an active shooter, for example, is neutralized. So there may be a significant delay, which is why these kits are in every classroom, right? But no, don't take that tourniquet down. Let us deal with that. It shouldn't be up long enough to really cause an issue on that side. Yeah, that's a great question. Any other questions? Yeah.
I have relatives in surrounding areas of California who are also educators, and I was explaining about the kids to them. How do other school districts get this kind of
It's a great question.
support?
So the question is, how do other school districts get this? So the girls actually, they have their company is a nonprofit, and by nonprofit, yeah, it doesn't make profit, but yeah, they don't make profit. They're not looking to make any money off of this. So the initial kits were placed with the donation from private funds. Subsequent kits can be purchased from their website at their cost. So to the point where if you can write a check, they'll knock the price, $2 off the price, because they don't have to pay the credit card processing fee. So it's on their website, keepthepressure.com. They sell this kit, which is $105, and they sell a kit with something called a SWAT T, which is not out here. It's a different kind of a tourniquet. That there's a kit that has one cat tourniquet and one SWAT T, and that's $92, $94, and then $80 for one that has two SWAT Ts. So, and the company that we work with to provide us the materials and the kits is out of the East Coast, and they're all military veterans. They basically sell us the stuff at their cost. So if anyone can find these items in a kit for cheaper, it could be counterfeit. That's the only reason I bring it up. So I'd be very concerned if you did find it cheaper. So keepthepressure.com is probably the cheapest way you can get in those things. And we can work with people if they need to buy individual items too. We've done that with one of the junior highs wanted to buy a bunch of SWAT Ts. So it's a great question. Any other questions? And we're not advertising for that. The girls don't care if you buy their kit or any kit, just as long as there's a kit. That's what we just want to get kits everywhere. Other questions? There are no bad questions. Yes.
A lot of the classes were having to be silent for a long period of time. How long should you apply the pressure? Is it constant for an hour or an hour and a half?
It's a great question. And I'm so sorry that usually girls answer all these questions, but again, this is a bit of a special situation. Usually, the quick clot gauze is going to allow the blood to clot faster. So a great rule of thumb is that you want to keep applying pressure until the bleeding is stopped. So whether with a quick clot gauze, the recommendation is I think at least 3 minutes. With other things, the recommendation is more than 10 minutes. I'll oftentimes tell patients in the emergency department to just hold 20 minutes of pressure by the clock, because more pressure is not going to be a problem. What you don't want to do is you don't want to put pressure, you're making a successful hemostasis, you're forming clots there, and then you take it off and take a peek. Anytime you remove something, you're actually pulling off the clots that you were making and causing it to rebleed. So we want to just add constant pressure until the bleeding stops, which could be any number. And that's also a sign, like if someone has a cut and you're just applying, remember, most bleeding stops with direct pressure. So if you're applying pressure and your hand's still getting wet and it's still leaking out around there, that's when you want to jump to the items that are in the bleed kit to help you stop that. Jessica?
Yeah, I just wanted to say it really depends on your situation because some wounds can be worse than others. So just assess your situation, and if it stops, then it stops. But some wounds can be worse, so you just keep going.
Yeah.
Oh. And also, like with what he was saying with the 10 minutes of pressure at least, I mean, with everything that can be found in these kits, please improvise. If you're in an area and you don't have a kit with you, use a t-shirt, use a belt, use anything. And going back to the question about purchasing the bleed kits, we also do have a video on our website that's kind of just a breakdown of the wonderful trauma nurses got to show you earlier. So if you want to, please send that to family, send that to friends. Really, we are not here to make money. We are a nonprofit organization. We just want this information to be able to get out there and for as many people to know it as possible, because this is the information that's going to be really helpful if you ever need to save someone's life.
Yeah, that video that's on their website is consumable for public. Just please send it anywhere. Again, it's part about getting the education out, just like to stop the bleed. It's very, very important. And to add on to what the girls were saying there, in the emergency department, so when the patient comes to me, I don't care if you put the oily rag that was on the floor of your garage in someone's wound, or that there was dirt on a sock that you used to push into someone's wound to stop the bleeding. We can clean all that stuff up. We can fix all that stuff. We have antibiotics. We've got an operating room that we can wash things out. That's not a problem. The goal is to just get hemostasis or to stop the bleeding. So, very important. Great questions. Any other questions? Yes, in the back.
How would you dress and wrap a wound if someone had been shot through their shoulder using the things in the kit?
That's a great question. So I think it's important, it's probably already brought up, but the tourniquets really are only for extremity wounds, and that's really going to be kind of past the major joints of the shoulder and the hip joint, right? You can't really go anywhere, what we would say more proximal to that. So if it's on the shoulder, first you're going to do direct pressure. Okay, that's not working. Next thing I would recommend doing is I would recommend the bleed gauze. So anything that's kind of in here, the bleed gauze has absolutely saved lives, It works. So you want to plug the wound, and with the bleed gauze, just stuff it in there as much as you can, and then apply pressure with the bleed gauze. And if that's not working, the compressive dressing is big enough that you can actually go around the shoulder, you can go around the chest, you can go around the belly on a small student, maybe not on somebody my size, but even maybe someone on my size. So you can get one wrap around, just something that's applying constant pressure, the bleed gauze should make a huge difference and should stop it. It's a great question.
If you have the bleed gauze, but they have an entry and an exit wound, is there one that you should prioritize?
That is an outstanding question. So the reason why it's an outstanding question is because not many people think about the exit wound. And so if someone is just sitting against a wall and they've got a hole in the front of their arm, for example, and you're like, oh my gosh, you have a hole in the front of your arm and it's leaking, we need to fix that, that's great. But we always in the emergency room, we roll everybody. So we look at the opposite side, because it depends on the weapon, it depends on the projectile, there are many different variables. However, oftentimes there is an exit wound, and usually the exit wound is oftentimes bigger than the entrance wound. So just to make you aware of that. Now there should be enough bleed gauze in here that you should be able to pack the entrance wound. There's trauma shears in the kit. You can cut it and use the remainder to pack the exit wound. But it just brings up a really good point that we've actually recently kind of been focusing on in our recent presentations, is to always pay attention and look for an exit wound, because that is very real, and you might think you're doing an amazing job with what you see, but it's what you don't see that sometimes can create the challenge. It's a wonderful question. Yeah, in the back.
Quick question. You talked about the SWAT T and the CAT T tourniquets. What is the difference between the two?
That is a wonderful question. So you saw the CAT T. I'm sure yeah, so sorry. We didn't mean to be. But why don't I have the girls show you the SWAT T? There's a couple benefits to the SWAT T. The CAT T is kind of a standard. This thing is awesome. This is what you're going to see the military guys, our heroes that are carrying, police, law enforcement officers are carrying. This is great. You can apply it yourself. You don't need anyone to help you apply it. It's single user. This is also single user. One of the only issues with this tourniquet is there is a finite diameter that it can go down to. So if you have a really thin patient, it may not be able to get tight enough to create enough pressure to stop the bleeding. The SWAT T does not have that problem. It also has, I think they did a study and there was like 100% naive user success rate, meaning like I handed you a packet and said this is a SWAT T and someone's bleeding, apply this, and they were able to do it every time. So and they were successful. So I'll let the girls talk about that.
And yeah, like he said, this is good to be used in like elementary schools and stuff because it can be used on any sized arm or anything. And also I'd like to mention that as they showed you, that tourniquet goes 2 to 3 fingers above the wound, but this tourniquet can go right on top of the wound.
Here, I'll put that for you.
Yeah, switch sides. So this tourniquet is really going to be amazing because it kind of acts as a 2-in-1, as it works as a tourniquet, but it's also very similar to the compressive dressing because you are putting it right on top of the wound and it is securing and keeping in that pressure. And my favorite part about this is that it is absolutely idiot-proof. The instructions are written right on the side, so there is no way that you can mess this one up. So you're going to start simply just by stretching it, and remember, if she were my actual patient and she was suffering from severe bleeding, first of all, I would be doing this tighter, and second of all, please use the trauma shears that are found in the kit to cut off articles of clothing before you do put on a tourniquet or stuff gauze into someone's wound.
And she's going to show you how to apply it. But SWAT T, S-W-A-T, stands for stretch, wrap, and tuck. So that's how the name got there. So she'll show you that.
Yes, so written right on the side, like you said, is stretch, wrap, and tuck. So you're going to do simply that. Start by stretching it, and you're going to want to stretch it really tight because like the first pull of the cat tourniquet, this is what's going to give you most of your leverage. So start by pulling it really tight. You can place it directly on top of the wound, and then you just start wrapping it. And just continue to do it on top of yourself, and each time you pull it over, continue to just pull it even tighter and really secure in that pressure. And the really cool thing about this one is that the last step is going to be to tuck it in, but really, after you continue to wrap it, it's actually able to hold itself in place, so if you were unable to tuck it, it will still be able to retain that pressure. So simply bring it to the front and then kind of pull up the rest of it and just tuck it right under. And then that's how you do it on. Just a perfect 2-in-1, works as a tourniquet, very helpful and similar to a compressive dressing SWAT T.
And so the SWAT T is great. Again, I'm going to say that the gold standard is going to be this cat tourniquet. This thing is really the gold standard. However, in certain situations, very, very thin arms, very, very thin patients, the SWAT T actually could be a little bit better. Again, the user rate, success rate is quite high. And the most important point for us to try to get kits to people is that these cost about $25 each or more, and these are about $9 to $10 each. So a much lower price point while still being able to accomplish the goal of stopping the bleeding and saving the life. It's a great question. Any other questions? Yeah?
So if you have multiple wounds, what do you prioritize? What part of the body?
That's a great question. So again, with these kits, the goal is to have enough things in here that you can treat 4 people. But maybe it's one person that has 4 wounds, or maybe it's 2 wounds and you need 2 tourniquets to stop that bleeding. So what I would recommend, to me, my preference is that you address whatever is the most urgent. This is what we do in emergency medicine. It's called triage, right? So if whatever wound is bleeding the most, that should have your attention. Like take a scalp wound, for example. A scalp wound, there's a lot of blood vessels in your scalp, and a scalp wound can bleed, and you finally clean it off, and it's like a staple puncture hole. You're like, how did that even happen? Like, it's insane. Or there's no bleeding, and the patient's like scalped, like they're missing half their scalp. The scalp is bizarre. So as with any wound, you can see a lot of bleeding or not a lot of bleeding. I would place your focus where you see the bleeding the most, And in particular, remember, almost all bleeding stops with direct pressure. So it would be that wound that does not stop with direct pressure. That's where you want to focus your attention first. And that's where you want to start running through these different tools. If need be, again, there's a kit in every classroom. You could, if you had to, leave your classroom to get a different kit if you ran out of supplies. Yeah, that's what I would do.
And I just wanted to say, in the past at other schools, they've had these kits before, but they've been in the principal's office or the health office or something like that. But our main goal is accessibility, because in a certain situation, you wouldn't want to be the one to have to go to the principal's office and grab that kit. You want to just have it, and you want it to be really easy to get. So.
That's right, yeah. So it's in every classroom. And by the way, if you needed to throw this kit out, to open out an open window or down a hallway or somewhere else, it's from police officers like it, because they can throw it from the back of their car to over their car to someone who needs it very easily portable. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Dr. Lawrence, is there an expiration date on the clotting gauze?
This is a great question. So the reason why the kit looks like this is because it's waterproof. It doesn't get funky if things spill on it. It will protect everything in this kit, and nothing in this kit expires except for the bleed gauze. So it's called Quick Clot Gauze. It's produced by a company called Z-Medica. The girls worked with the Z-Medica reps in that company to ensure a buyback program for any unused gauze. So basically, the Quick Clot Gauze expires in 5 years, and their nonprofit, Keep the Pressure, has pledged to replace that Quick Clot Gauze for our district, the Heart District, moving forward. But if you were to buy it from a different district, and you purchase the kit, then it would just be on you to replace the Quick Clot Gauze. I think they take back the unused gauze and give you a new gauze for like $16 per kit. It's not a ton, or it is a little bit, but it's definitely worth it. But that is the only thing that expires. Everything else does not expire. So that's a wonderful question. Yes. Any other questions? No? Very, very good questions. So I guess with that, are we going to do a hands-on? Yeah? Okay, great. I'll pass it over to you. Thank you.
Hey, let's thank Dr. Lawrence, Mason, Kendra. Appreciate all you've done to help us prepare, and you helped us through the event, so thank you so much. Let's get you hands-on up here. Again, be very cognizant of your surroundings up here on stage. We're going to push the tables back slightly. We got 4 different stations that will be manned. Put tourniquets on each other, have some fun, and happy birthday, Jason Ward. Come on up.
I was like, I'm so glad that wasn't working
Are you recording this part?
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for listening. If you want to try a tourniquet, put a tourniquet on.
Have you ever done any of this? Yeah.
Jump on in, man.
Nice to see you.
I'm hurting.
You're hurting. Where are you hurt? Right there. Okay. So do this.
So we're recording people using this stuff?
Really? I'll do one or do the other? Somebody said they don't do it now.
If you could, right?
Which way do you go?
So I guess you want to kind of tuck it in like that. I don't know. Where's the nurse? What a nurse. We have a question.
What about like winding it around the finger?
You can, is that what you're trying to do? Yeah, you could. Yeah, you don't have to. What we do is we just take it.
God, this stuff is like sticky. And then what do you do with this thing?
You can. I don't. I just.
You could then do it. It's not this style with this extra.
Shove it in, just like pack it.
Like that? Does that get it tighter?
That is getting it tighter, yeah. Keep going, keep going. Yes, there you go.
That's better?
Now we're cinched up.
Okay, and then I guess you hook it under.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, that's good.
And this is for right there.
Keep your mouth shut.
Stop screaming. And then you're right there. Sorry.
No,
Stop
you did it.
Okay. Yay. All right. Now we
Am I losing coloring in my fingers?
Are you? Like little radial pulse here? Let's try that. Okay. Wow, that's harder than you think. And it's like, I'm glad I had input to tell me to do it tightest because I wouldn't have.
You would have thought, I don't want to hurt them.
Right. Okay, somebody else. There we go. All right, who's next?
Yeah.
Want to try that? Want to try it on me? No, you do it on me. I already did it. You do it on me. I'm bleeding right here. This is where I'm bleeding.
Okay, so I want to get
2 inches above, and this is what I did with his arm. I put it up. Tighter. There you go. That's good. Yeah, it's weird to feel.
Yeah, and then you start
No.
twisting.
No. So bring that all the way.
Inside of here?
Yep, inside of there. Now start twisting.
Now I start twisting.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, there's a mark.
Crank it.
Alright, well, I don't
Another one.
hurt you.
Crank it. No, I'll tell you.
Okay.
Okay, now you got to tuck it in. Tuck that, the end of the baton,
into here?
the clip.
Oh.
Go. Push. There you go.
Oh, well, something like that.
Well, something like that.
So, but something in the clip like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Oh.
And then you put this. That's the time stamp.
Timestamp.
Yeah. Perfect.
All right.
There we go.
Thank you for
You're
helping
welcome.
train me.
Absolutely. I know. You're like, woohoo! All right. I know what I'm getting everybody for Christmas. Seriously, this is on my Christmas list. This is for all of our RVs, all of our everything.
How much footage are we gathering?
Yes, thank you.
If you put the gauze there and take it off, that's just going to destroy all the clotting that you just want. So like if you put this on and still bleeding, then you can be like, oh well, now I need something different. So you could do tourniquet or anything like that. Because they did used to say, because I used to stretch Yeah, it really just depends. You can just see what you have to do in your terms. When in doubt,
Stop bleeding.
I think I'm stopping bleeding.
yes.
Yeah, I think
You twist before you?
No, you have to. You would want to get, I think, this thing where you can
want to just
right?
like putting.
So you probably want this right here so you can see where it is. And then take off the timestamp and put it on when you're done, I think.
Yeah, that right there would be more. I think that's going to be the most dramatic.
Okay, so maybe that goes on when you're done. So tight. Tight. Like that. And then you roll it up. Yeah, like that. Yeah.
6 times stamp.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. You're good at this.
Well, she taught me.
It helps though.
Right? I didn't know. I want to see what the other
I want to see what that box is
So
like.
actually, he does. It's just like I feel like I could do it faster if I just went like this.
And you don't have to take your finger?
No, that's what he said. This is what he does.
You can take out your finger.
Okay. So just keep thumb. Because I want, if I had to keep a finger in, it would be slower for me.
Yeah, that's what was happening.
Yeah.
Oh.
And then you just keep it up.
Yeah.
Show me, my surprise. Like more than
Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, you're wonderful.
They are packing up.
I'm so good at that.
Patch? Patrick?